morning. It's April 12th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the International Monetary Fund, trimming the 2023 economic growth outlook for South Korea. The IMF has cut the projection once again, this time from 1.7% to 1.5%. That's already the fourth consecutive cut by the international agency. South Korea believes the U.S. has no spiteful intentions regarding the recent drama involving Washington eavesdropping on Seoul's top office, and that the leaked classified documents were fabricated by a third party. From today, the world's oldest metal print book, Korea's Jikji 심체 요절, will go on public display in France for the first time in 50 years. The International Monetary Fund has slashed South Korea's economic growth projection by 0.2 percentage points to 1.5%. This comes as the UN's financial agency expects the global economy to face rocky economic recovery this year. Our 신세벽 starts us off.
The International Monetary Fund on Tuesday cut its 2023 economic growth outlook for South Korea to 1.5%. That's down 0.2 percentage points from its estimate in January. It's also slightly below the Bank of Korea's projection of 1.6% made in February. The IMF did not explain the reasons behind the adjustment to its outlook, but it could be largely attributed to growing concerns that aggressive monetary tightening policies may impede global economic growth. In fact, earlier in the day, the BOK froze its key interest rate at 3.5% for the second time straight due to growing concerns over an economic slowdown. The 1% range projection for South Korea is on par with projections for other major economies. The IMF expects the U.S. economy to grow 1.6%, Japan's 1.3%, and Canada's to see 1.5% growth. But this would mark only the fifth time in history that South Korea's economic growth fell below 2%. The last time it grew below 2% was in 2020, when the Korean economy contracted by 0.7% during the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, the IMF said the global economy faces a rocky road to recovery in 2023, edging down its global economic outlook to 2.8%. That's 0.1 of a percentage point lower than its previous forecast. The organization said lingering global economic uncertainties, such as the war in Ukraine and persistently high inflation, are affecting growth. Despite these grim figures, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, in a news conference on Tuesday, was rather optimistic about the outlook.
I do think the outlook is reasonable. It's certainly stronger, brighter than the last time we had the annual meetings in October. I wouldn't overdo the negativism about the global economy.
Yellen said a number of economies, including the United States, were proving resilient with strong labor markets, easing supply chain problems, and lowering energy costs. She also said the global financial system was also resilient due to reforms enacted after the 2008 financial crisis. 신세벽, Arirang News.
2 out of 3 Wall Street banks believe the U.S. Fed's key interest rate will reach the 5 to 5.25% range. The Bank of Korea's New York office last Friday conducted a survey of 12 U.S.-based investment banks, asking what level they believe the U.S. Fed's key interest rate will reach before hikes stop. 8 investment banks predict that the key interest rate will reach the 5 to 5.25% range. In response to the same question last month, only 3 of the banks predicted those figures, with most of the participants predicting a range of 5.5 to 5.75%. They cited instability in the banking sector due to the fallout from the Silicon Valley Bank collapse as the main reason for the latest outlook. South Korea believes that there is no substantial evidence of the U.S. spying on Seoul with malicious purposes, amid such allegations stemming from the recent leaks of U.S. military documents. Now, that's according to Principal Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Tae-hyo speaking to reporters as he arrived in Washington, D.C. for talks about preparations for an upcoming state visit to the U.S. by President Yoon Suk-yeol. That's in line with previous remarks made before his departure that the defense chiefs of Seoul and Washington spoke by phone and agreed that much of the purported information in the leaked document was forged. The security official added that there'll be no message by Seoul to Washington on that matter, given that the materials are fabricated by a third party. In its annual diplomatic blue book released on Tuesday, Japan has once again excluded its pledge to uphold apologies to South Korea over wartime atrocities and has insisted on its false claims to South Korea's Dokdo Island. Seoul's foreign ministry called in a Japanese official to protest against such unjust, invalid arguments. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has more.
Last month, the South Korean government announced its plan to compensate the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor through a public foundation, instead of through the Japanese firms found guilty by a South Korean court. At the time, Japan's foreign minister said he hoped the solution would help restore ties between the two countries, and said the Japanese government will continue to uphold the apologies it made in the past.
On this occasion, we confirm that the Japanese government continues to uphold the stance on historical recognition made by previous cabinets as a whole, including the joint declaration between Japan and South Korea made in October 1998.
But Japan made no mention of this in its newly published Diplomatic Blue Book, an annual report on the country's foreign policy and activities released by Tokyo's foreign ministry on Tuesday. Regarding the issue of compensating wartime forced labor victims, the report noted that Seoul and Tokyo have been discussing it since President Yoon Suk-yeol took office in May, through diplomatic channels and at the recent summit between the two countries' leaders. The report did not explain the fact that Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi has said the Japanese government will uphold the stance made by previous cabinets, including the joint declaration between South Korea and Japan in 1998. The joint statement in 1998 between former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung and former Japanese Prime Minister Keizo Obuchi includes Tokyo's deep remorse and heartfelt apology for causing tremendous damage and suffering to Koreans during its colonial rule. The latest report from Japan also claimed that South Korea has maintained an illegal occupation of Dokdo Island, which they refer to as Takeshima. Japan has been insisting this in its annual diplomatic blue book for 6 years, since 2018. In response, South Korea's foreign ministry called in Naoki Kumagai, the deputy chief of mission at the Japanese embassy in Seoul, to protest. Also, the ministry spokesperson said in a statement on Tuesday that Japan should immediately retract the unjust sovereignty claim to what is a part of South Korean territory historically, geographically, and under international law. He added Japan should be aware that repeating such claims does not contribute to the building of a future-oriented relationship between Seoul and Tokyo. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
As widely expected, the Bank of Korea opted for another rate freeze for the country's interest rate on Tuesday. That means the central bank could be one step closer to ending its vicious rate hike cycle. But is that really the case? And if so, what's next? For more, we're joined by Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning to you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us. The central bank named inflation forecasts above the target level and financial risks broadening in major countries for its latest rate freeze decision. Professor, is that so? I mean, what other factors played a role in keeping the rate at 3.5%?
Yeah, Chairman of the Bank of Korea has mentioned that the turmoil which has been reverberated around the world in the U.S. and in the European international bank, investment banks such as Credit Suisse. However, that is just a reason that is proposed as a financial sector's problem. However, in Korean domestic economy has suffered so much from some upcoming recess. I believe that Korean economy is now in the recess, or just starting of the recess, because of the recently the turmoil in the short-term corporate bonds market, such as commercial papers market has been suffered so much from the sudden freeze of the guarantee by some municipal government in the last October and September. So currently, Korea's economic problem is not just a problem from the abroad, but domestic problem is more severe than the problems from originated from the foreign financial market. So the consecutive freeze is very welcome, and also it would be a little bit more the prospect, as long as the prospect is not good. So I'm thinking about some reducing, rather than hiking, rather than interest hike, the reducing interest rate should be under consideration.
Sure. So the central bank focusing more on the domestic problems and challenges at the moment. And on top of the rate freeze yesterday, the BOK also said the country's economic growth outlook for this year will fall slightly below the February forecast, which is 1.6%. Now, Professor, what does that mean? Does it mean soaring consumer prices are no longer the top priority?
I agree with that. And rather than worrying about because consumer price index and the producer price index is 4.8%, and the consumer price index is 4.5 or 6%. So clearly the inflation shows some declining, but however, the economic growth and the domestic economy is really a problem. The growth rate has been, this morning the IMF just, the outlook for the South Korean economic growth rate is 1.5%, reduced from 1.7%, so even worse than the Bank of Korea's outlook. So to that regard, we've first to focus on not only the problem of the negative area of balance of trade, deficit of balance of trade, and also the very weak economic activities within domestic market. That is really a serious threat.
Right. And at the same time, the central bank policymakers have left the door open for a quarter-point hike, whereas there are some market voices saying that there may be a rate cut as early as in the latter half of the year. Now, Professor, what's your point of view?
I think that is somewhat like don't expect too much about rate reduction in the future. So they are concerned about some boom, the unexpected boom from the real estate market because of expecting the lower interest rate, basic interest rate. So, but it's like a threat without any meaningful intention at all. So that is just an exaggeration, I think.
Right. We'll have to wait and see. Now, the interest rate difference between South Korea and the U.S. stands at 1.5 percentage points. That's already the widest gap in around 2 decades. Now, if the Fed does push ahead with another rate hike, widening the gap, what will that mean for South Korea and the market?
Yeah, currently we have 1.5% difference or interest rate gap between U.S. and Korea. But however, it's quite a long period since we have been decoupled from each other because of the exchange rate is largely affected not by the interest rate level, but by some purchasing power or domestic economy and the prospect of growth rate. I think those parts plays more role than the interest rate. So that means as long as the prospect is good, then the dollars and the foreign investment will come into South Korea. Otherwise, it will flow out. In U.S., the problem is, even though U.S. has a prospect is a little bit good, as long as the only domestic economy is good, does not necessarily mean it produces a very financial profit to the international financial investors. So as long as the issues of future prospect and profitability depends upon both the domestic economy of U.S. and abroad, then the stock market response is always affected by whether the prospect of the U.S. economy is good or not, and also the available financial fund that is affected by the interest rate. At least the U.S. maintains some interest rate very high to keep the inflation under control. But whereas for South Korea, we don't have to worry about those interest rate gap, and then we do not pay attention to the exchange rate. So as long as the depreciation of Korean currency would be of help to the improving the balance of trade for South Korea.
Right. All right, Professor Song, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a lovely day.
Yeah, thank you too.
China is once again struggling with extremely severe yellow dust, which is not only a concern of Beijing, but also causing alarm for South Korea. The authorities here are bracing for poor air quality nationwide throughout the day today. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
Yellow dust covered Beijing and other parts of China on Monday and Tuesday, with sand even piling up on streets, making it difficult for cars to pass. The yellow dust, which originated from Inner Mongolia, quickly spread to 18 regions in China, including Shanghai and Tianjin, on strong northwest winds. This is the fifth time that the country has experienced such extreme levels of yellow dust this year. China's Forestry Science Research Institute analyzed that yellow dust is appearing more often due to low rainfall in the region this year. And this is bad news for South Korea, which will see significant levels of yellow dust also flow into the country on Wednesday. During a press briefing on Tuesday, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said the highest level of yellow dust so far this year is expected to hit the country. He advised that the elderly and people with respiratory conditions refrain from going outside, but should wear a mask if they do so. He said the yellow dust level, which was at attention level on Tuesday, would reach a caution on Wednesday. At the same time, Prime Minister Han ordered related ministries and local governments to promptly inform the public of the current situation and thoroughly implement safety measures according to the Yellow Dust Response Manual. He also called on daycare centers, kindergartens, and schools to either close or have classes shortened in order to thoroughly implement and guide safety measures to protect the children's health. He urged organizers and participants to take appropriate precautions in preparation for outdoor events such as sporting events and performances. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
Korea's Jikji Simche Yojul, a book about the teachings of great Buddhist priests, is the world's oldest metal print book. Part of the UNESCO Memory of the World program, the book will go on public display in France for the first time in 50 years. Our Lee Kyung-eun has this story.
Korea's Jikji Simche Yojul, the world's oldest surviving book made by movable metal print, will be shown to the public in France for the first time in half a century. Starting Wednesday, April 12, the Jikji will go on display at the National Library of France as part of an exhibition on the history of printing. The last time the book was available for public viewing was exactly 50 years ago, in 1973. The Jikji is about the teachings of great Buddhist priests. The book was printed at Heungdeok Temple in Cheongju in 1377 during the Goryeo Kingdom. That was 78 years before the Gutenberg Bible, the earliest substantial book printed using metal type in Europe. In 2001, the Jikji was formally added to UNESCO's Memory of the World. Jikji originally consisted of 2 volumes, but only one copy of the second volume currently exists. The book was initially acquired by the first French minister to Korea in the 19th century. It was put up for auction in Paris in 1911 and then donated to the National Library of France in 1952. Ever since, it has been kept in the library storage. During the exhibition, the Gutenberg Bible and the Boa Protad, two of the other oldest printings in the world, will also be presented together. The exhibition will run for 3 months until July 16th. 이경은, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Myanmar, where dozens of people have reportedly been killed in an airstrike launched by the military junta. According to the country's government in exile, the National Unity Government, roughly 100 people, including women and children, were killed in the village of Jikji on Tuesday local time. Other reports put the death toll closer to 50. According to eyewitnesses, a military jet dropped a bomb on people that had gathered for the opening of a new facility built by the military government's opponents. A gunship helicopter then reportedly attacked the village for 20 minutes. Myanmar's military government has not commented on the allegations. Meanwhile, in Russia, day turned to night for some residents in the far eastern Kamchatka region when a volcano erupted, spewing ash as high as 20 kilometers into the sky. The eruption of the Suvaluch volcano took place on Tuesday local time. The resulting ash cloud covered about 108,000 square kilometers, an area approximately the same size as South Korea, and buried some villages in ash as deep as 8.5 centimeters. A red aviation notice was issued over fears the ash cloud could affect aircraft flying in the area. Experts say the volcano has since calmed, and haven't ruled out further ash clouds. Now, the volcano is one of the biggest and most active in the region and last erupted in 2007. Turning over to Taiwan, where an unofficial badge worn by the self-governing island's Air Force has gone viral. It depicts a black bear holding a Taiwanese flag punching Winnie the Pooh. The cartoon character has long been used to mock Chinese President Xi Jinping due to their supposed likeness. And the Chinese government has censored references to Winnie the Pooh in social media posts. The new badge has become a symbol of defiance against Beijing, which has conducted several days of military drills around the island. The drills come after Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen met with the United States House Speaker Kevin McCarthy last week. And finally, a pair of Michael Jordan's sneakers have been sold for a record-breaking $2.2 million. The Jordan 13s were sold in an online Sotheby's auction on Tuesday for the highest price ever paid for a pair of sneakers. They were worn by the basketball legend during the athlete's final season in Game 2 of the 1998 NBA Finals. Jordan scored 37 points in the game as his team, the Chicago Bulls, went on to win 93-88 against Utah Jazz. The shoes are in good condition and feature 2 large signatures by Jordan. Last September, a jersey worn by Michael Jordan in Game 1 of the same final went under the hammer for $10.1 million.
Good morning. An unpromising start to the day weather-wise after yesterday's storm-force windy day. Now it's unbearably high levels of dust that the entire country is experiencing. Dust levels are 7 times higher than normal in the capital area, and the rest of the country is also on high alert against yellow dust with dust alerts issued. Now, northwesterly winds brought not only high levels of yellow dust, but also cold air to the country, with a cold weather advisory issued to the west of the inland areas with some frost and ice being seen. Meanwhile, dry air alerts remain in place in the east along with strong winds. So please take extra precautions against wildfire. Temperatures stay below norms all day with big temperature differences between lows and highs across Korea. Then afternoon highs will be 2 to 4 degrees, lower than yesterday, with Gwangju and Busan seeing a high of 19 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Sunny skies nationwide, but avoid spending time outdoors today. Air quality remains unhealthy until tomorrow. The nationwide rain is in the forecast from late Friday into Saturday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is all we have for today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time. Thanks for watching.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's April 12th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Niall Song.
Good morning, everyone.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. Let's start with our news feed. A news feed which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Two people fainted on the subway line of Gimpo City in Gyeonggi-do Province on Tuesday because it was jam-packed. One was a teen and another was in her 30s. They both rode the subway during the morning rush hour between 7 and 8 a.m. Paramedics soon came to treat them, and both passengers had major headaches and difficulty breathing. Moving on, after hearing this news, you may want to check twice before making an in-person payment for a delivery, because recently police indicted 4 people from a delivery company over committing card fraud worth around $13,000. The method behind their crimes was using an illegal card replicator. They would ask customers to slide their card 2 times, once on the replicator and the second on the actual payment machine. And moving on to the third one, the Dalai Lama has apologized over a viral video showing the spiritual leader kissing a child on the lips and then asking him to, quote, suck his tongue. In a statement on Monday, the Dalai Lama said he wishes to apologize to the boy and his family, and the current Dalai Lama is Tenzin Gyatso, the best-known living Buddhist figure in the world. Now let's go a bit deeper into the last news item. While many people condemn the Dalai Lama's actions as a form of child abuse, one Tibetan lawmaker in exile tried defending the spiritual leader. Take a listen to what he had to say.
It's a part of joke. It's such a part of like a play with a child. So we should not go to more than that.
So this Tibetan lawmaker said it's part of a joke. It's like playing with a child. It was totally innocent. But what are your thoughts on this, Walter?
I mean, what a strange story, right? Like, it's such a weird thing to say. I've actually met the Dalai Lama before, and luckily he didn't ask me to suck his tongue. It was a weird situation. However, yes, it's such a weird, I can't even imagine a culture where that would be acceptable.
Right.
And yes, it's very bad. I mean, to be devil's advocate, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, and he was just trying to be innocent, but yeah, it was totally unacceptable.
It's quite disturbing.
Yeah,
no matter what the
was.
intentions was, the action was clearly wrong. But what about you, Nell? What did you first think about when you heard this news?
Guys, I actually saw this news first thing in the morning yesterday at 5 a.m. when I woke up, and I was like, is this some kind of joke? What is this? And my gut instinct was, gross, you know, and no matter how playful and what kind of a joke they're playing, I don't think it's appropriate for the global audience to see. And, you know, we should talk about consent. And obviously, yes, this is child abuse. And I don't know. It just didn't seem very convincing what they were trying to do as an excuse for him. So
definitely
not okay with that.
Child abuse, whatever the intentions were, whatever the motives were, it's inexcusable no matter what. And that was our news feed for this Wednesday. Moving on, we're going to jump into our main discussion now. More Korean food businesses are expanding overseas thanks to K-dramas, and K-food naturally exposed their flourishing. And what's the first taste you think of when you think of K-food? For many here, it's spice. And to find out more about today's topic, take a look at the screen. The spicier, the better. That seems to be what many in Korea look for in their food. Market data shows that since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, sales of spicy food at convenience stores have increased by at least 20%. Analysts believe this was because many people wanted to relieve stress. It's no surprise that Koreans love their food spicy. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs found that Koreans consume 165,000 tons of chili peppers every year. That's around 3.3 kilograms of chili peppers per Korean each year. Today, NewsGen looks at 3 questions. 1. When did Korean food start getting spicy? 2. How much do young Koreans love spicy food? Why has this extremely hot food trend been popular among millennials and Gen Z abroad as well? 3. What are some pros and cons behind this eating trend? Koreans' love for spicy food is becoming a global trend, and that's because many people want to try Korean food themselves. And before we go further into the discussion, why don't you two here in the studio tell us how Korean food, and specifically spicy dishes, have been gaining popularity abroad?
You know, I want to talk about the time I lived in Morocco, and back in the early 2000s to 2010s, there really wasn't much access to Korean food, and there was a tiny community of Koreans, maybe a couple hundred, and people tried starting up businesses, selling Korean food, and the businesses failed every time. They shut down because nobody was looking for Korean food other than the small number of community that was there. And then I guess later in the 2010s, Psy's Gangnam Style, BTS, taking over the world, and the Buldak Spicy Noodle Challenge, and now everybody wants to try it. So people have actually started selling them, and as I understand it, it's quite successful nowadays. So that's how I see the change in popularity in Korean food from where I used to live. And all that to explain, because I didn't have access to such spicy food, that's why I'm a mepjiri, or also known as a level 1 spicy person. So I'm not good with spicy food at all.
I see. And with more people watching K-dramas and having their favorite K-pop celebrity eating them, I think a lot of people are curious to find out what this tastes like. But Walter, how would you explain how popular Korean dishes are abroad?
Yeah, so I'll go to the example of Australia. Now, I love Korean food. When I go back to Australia, I even have to eat Korean food while I go back for that week off. But whenever I go into the restaurants, there are usually tons of people, always full, but not just of Korean people, it's of many different cultures. So it's great to see how good Korean food has, how popular Korean food has become. Now, obviously, I think a lot of Westerners in Australia, they like the bibimbap, which is very easy to eat, it's very delicious. Korean-style chicken, a big favorite these days. Everyone loves it, and including myself. I don't think maybe the westernized Australians like the tteokbokki. Yeah, the spicy
it's so good, though.
Rice cake, the spicy rice cake. But talking about the celebrities eating the food, I know that BTS's Jimin, hashtag army, may have helped with the popularity of like this spicy rice dish, because it was reported after he was seen eating it, there was meal kits sold at 450% on the increase. So, I mean, look at the influence our celebrities have on the food industry in Korea. It's amazing. And now I see shin ramen, kimchi everywhere.
Right. Spicy food is taking the world by a storm. But Koreans haven't been the best with spicy dishes. Like chili peppers were only first brought to Korea from Japan in the late 1500s. The peppers then had more of a sweetness to them rather than spiciness. And it was only after the Korean War when farmers produced spicy cheongyang peppers. But now, why don't you go deeper and tell us the history about when Korean food started getting spicy?
You know, like you mentioned, Korean food is traditionally not that spicy. And even if you look at the royal cuisine, the traditionally very bland, and it's not even salty, it's not spicy.
Right.
If you look at the tteokbokki, the rice cake that Walter mentioned, it's actually soy sauce based, and it's not that spicy at all. And there's several theories on how we started accepting spicier and spicier food into our culture, and you actually mentioned one of them is the Japanese invasion of Korea in 1592. But, you know, it became more and more popular later on throughout history. But there's this other theory of, you know, the Chinese having brought it into Korea after, you know, Columbus brought it in from South America. It just traveled the rest of the world and it just stuck with Korea. And after 18th century, Confucianism started spreading in Korea as well. And with all these new rituals and the memorial services that people were doing, they wanted to preserve their food.
Definitely.
They wanted to preserve it, and salt was expensive.
Right.
So some other options were, you know, making it spicy and preserving it for a longer period of time. And after the Korean War, we needed to preserve food because there wasn't a lot.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's how it became popular.
Right, and as you could see on the screen, you could see gochugaru, the peppers there. It's red now, but it was quite surprising for me when I was doing my research that it only became red and spicy, you know, much early, not later than expected, right?
Yeah.
But eating hotter dishes seems to be a challenge now, or a trend, especially among young people, including myself. And there's even specific Korean lingo referring to people who are good at eating spicy dishes. It's called mepbushim. We'll be telling you what that's about. So here in the studio, Walter, are you one of the many people in Korea, one of the youngsters, who have this so-called mepbushim? Explain to us what mepbushim is first, and then tell us about your
Okay, so for people who don't know, it basically means people who can eat the extreme level of spiciness, all right? Now, me, no, not at all. I can eat certain spicy foods, but definitely not the top spice. I do sometimes challenge myself to do it, and I fail very, very terribly.
But why do people want to have so much mepbushim?
Well, I know that with at least my female friends that they do it to release a bit of stress. It seems like their stress release. They're not like me and they eat 2 pizzas instead. I'm that sort of person, but no, a lot of people eat because it's a stress reliever. And it's also like an addiction for them as well. I mean, they eat it and then they get these sort of, I guess they capsize and it creates pain in the body, and then body's natural reaction is to release those endorphins, which are pleasure hormones, and therefore they get hooked on it. But yeah, why do you eat spicy food?
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you guys.
Are you good?
I really love spicy food. I think I have the biggest mepbushim in the world, and mepbushim in Korean, it's like spicy plus dignity. You have that pride of eating really spicy. And for me, it's like breaking a challenge, you know? The spicier I get, I feel more accomplished. I feel like I achieve something. But of course, I know there are a lot of health drawbacks to this. So what do you guys think are the pros and cons of people like me having mepbushim, or the pride of eating spicy foods?
Let's talk about the pros first, because it is exciting. And like Walter mentioned, it is a stress relief. And actually, spiciness is not a flavor. It's actually a type of pain.
It is, yeah.
And so you're causing pain on your stomach. And as you do that, your body releases kind of the different types of hormones like endorphin and adrenaline. It's like working out pretty much. But you're doing that to yourself. And so you feel happier and less stressed afterwards. And it's delicious. So it's great. And also the whole mepbushim, the dignity, the pride. Your friends will applaud you and you will be a hero.
I mean, look at the people on the screen. They look so happy eating all these like very spicy dishes. We're seeing a lot of YouTube creators try it out. I know you were one of them. We saw in the mukbang trend episode you having the 불닭볶음면, the spicy noodles. So Walter, why don't you walk us through the cons then?
Do they look happy? Do they really look happy? Maybe on the outside they look very happy, but on the inside is a very different story. I'm talking stomach ulcers, I'm talking intestinal damage, heartburn, reflux. Not to mention the next day on the toilet, not to give you too much information about that, you can probably imagine. I've seen tons of those videos before, and like you said, I have been a part of it, and it was not fun at all for people like me. So yes, the cons are your health. Look after your intestines and whatever.
Definitely.
Yes.
There's a lot of health drawbacks for sure, but it's no doubt that this is a global trend. So we're now going to be including a global millennial in our talks. He's actually a content creator itself, and he loves spicy food. But to find out more, wait a minute after this. We're now going to include a content creator who loves trying out spicy Korean food and filming them for people to see. It's Max Abrams, also known as Max Not Beer on various social media platforms. Great to have you here, Max.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, Max, you heard us talk about how many millennials and Gen Z in Korea have mepbushim, or are really proud about eating spicy dishes. So I wonder, is it like that abroad? Like, is there any similar lingo or concepts for people who feel superior or really proud because they can eat really spicy dishes?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that there is a word as concise as mepbushim to sort of describe this global phenomena, but what I do think is certainly true is that various cultural groups will take a lot of ownership and pride over their spiciest of dishes as sort of representative of the culture itself. And I think a reason they do that is because there's a degree of exclusivity around it, right? If it's super spicy and not everyone can have it, the dish itself gets to remain something that's ours, something that we get to treasure. And while, of course, people are invited to come and enjoy it, not everyone can handle it, right? And so I think that it's a very special phenomena that cultures get to hold on to sort of their spiciest challenges, if you will, as something that's like pretty sacred to the culture itself. The other unique thing too is that Korean spice is very different from Indian spice, which is different to Ethiopian spice, which is different to Mexican spice, and so on and so forth. So it's not to say that if you have mepbushim in the Korean sense that you'll be great at devouring the spiciest Mexican food or the spiciest Indian food. The cultures themselves get to remain separate in that sense and sort of engage in a little bit of competition with one another to see who can really outspicy one another. And I think that's something really special and fun that only food can provide us.
Right, and speaking of exclusivity, you know, everyone wants to see how far that person can go when it comes to like really spicy food. That's why I believe a lot of content creators like yourself and our Walter right here has tried eating spicy food on air. Could you share like the most spicy dish you've had so far and what really motivated you to keep doing that?
The spiciest dish I've had so far is probably 닭발, 아니면 낙지볶음, but the highest level.
Oh, really?
Well, it was the highest level in New York when I had it, which is to say that it was probably like the second level in Korean spice, because the levels themselves are very different if you go abroad, which is worth mentioning. The spiciest level in America is truly probably like the second level if you get like pakgari or something here in Korea. I tried it. My followers were really curious to see what my reaction would be, and I'm making a lot of food content these days. I thought before that experience that I had mepbushim, that I would be pretty good at it. And then shortly after the eating experience, that quickly faded, and I will most likely never do it again. Unless there's a pretty special opportunity, because the aftermath of that situation was not so great. Yeah.
Well, I actually recommend something for you if you're going to go out there. There is I actually tasted a very spicy donkas, and it was actually a challenge. Now, if you look it up, I'll let you know later on. It was a challenge to do it. I had this much, and I was sweating within seconds.
Yeah. It's meant to be a stress relief, and then I just end up more stressed than I've ever been.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Those are definite downsides for sure. And 닭발, for our foreign viewers who don't know, they're chicken feet. They're marinated in really spicy sauce. 낙지볶음, like squid, you mix it with spicy sauce as well. But moving on to my last question. Max, in your opinion, what initially hooked foreigners to Korean spicy food, and why do you think people want to try K-food out so much?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned earlier, certainly the proliferation of Korean cultural products such as K-dramas, K-pop certainly generated interest abroad. But when you think about it, from my perspective, food is the lowest barrier of entry for foreign fans to engage with Korean culture. I was lucky enough to come and study here in Korea, but for those who can't afford that experience, food is one of the easiest ways to feel as though they're akin to the Korean experience, that they get to enjoy the same things their idols do. And so nowadays, with the spread of Korean ingredients abroad, it's very easy for someone to find gochugaru, to find red pepper powder, sugar, soy sauce, and make their own version of tteokbokki and feel the closest they'll perhaps ever feel to Korea. So I think regardless of what's getting popular, be it makeup, skincare, K-pop, K-dramas, it all kind of leads back down to the food that for some people is the most accessible Korean cultural product for them to try.
And you build an immediate connection.
Yes.
All right.
And it becomes a memory. So, yeah.
Definitely. All right. Thank you so much, Max. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you all for having me.
All right. Max mentioned a lot of very interesting and fun points there, but which fascinated you the most?
I think it's when he mentioned the whole exclusivity thing. It makes you feel, I guess, you know, superior. You're up there. You can have different types of food and other people can't. I mean, like I mentioned, I have no pride in that area. So good for you guys. Good for those who are up there in the exclusive
You're in the
levels
exclusive club.
Yeah.
What about you, Walter?
Yeah, like I actually tail end on what Niall said. I remember when all my friends would like brag about, oh, I can eat the hottest Thai curry, or and I didn't really care. It's like, you try Korean food, I bet you it's hotter. But then Thai people would argue that, I think.
Right.
Because it's different types.
The palate's different too. I think the matter of spice, the degree is different. It tastes different for sure. But before we continue our talks, let's also hear what our global viewers had to say and whether they enjoy spicy food. Take a look at the screen to find out what a few had to say. I'll read them out. Leonard Vun said the spiciest dish I tasted in the Korean spicy stir-fried squid dish. And so I think this is nakjibokum, right? And I don't know how people can eat it, but it's very popular. Steph Manfredi said the spicy things I had were pepperoni pizza and Korean barbecue chicken, all right? And Gazelle said, I like spicy food, but there's a difference between a good burn and torture. I hear eating very spicy food can release stress. Very spicy food gives me stress instead. And that's what our Max said as well. You know, he was like, you know, this is usually for, you know, for you to relieve stress, but instead you gain stress by eating so much spicy food.
Exactly.
And I think this is a good segue into what we can say for our final thoughts. Where would you guys like to see the trend of eating spicy food go?
Well, for me, I think we'd like to see more variety out there for the international market. At the moment, it's very typical, like bibimbap or whatever. I'd like to see, more spicy dishes out there for many different countries. Now, if you come to Korea and you're not, you know, a big spice fan, but you want to try something spicy, my favorite Korean food is meontang. Now,
meontang.
You argue that it's not.
I know, my facial expression, I couldn't hide it.
like,
That's
it's
not
not
spicy.
But meon means like spicy.
It means spicy stew.
Spicy stew, right? Fish stew. I think it's great. Yes, it's not the spiciest, but it's really good. But if you really are a spicy fan, eat those chicken feet or the pig's trotters. They're really, really spicy.
And they're literally called like fire feet.
Right.
Fire,
Because it tastes like fire.
Exactly.
What about you, Nell? Where would you like to see the trend go?
I mean, I would like to see Korean food become more accessible in all the different countries, not just in the Western ones in the States and in Europe, but, you know, places that I've lived in like Morocco and Kenya and such. And I think everybody should be able to enjoy it. And like Max said, it's the first connection you make, and I think it's the connection that's going to last.
And I'm just saying, out of concern, we're not trying to isolate or ostracize people who can't have spicy food. Because here in the studio, these two are Korean, but you guys aren't, you know, you're not typically good at spicy food.
I'm not good with spicy
And
food.
it's fine. Our intention of today's episode is to really promote what type of Korean food is out there and how we all love food. We can all connect very easily with that. And we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Niall Song.
Thank you.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And thank you all for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.
My name is Andrew Chernesky. I'm